as we go deeper into our study on what the future holds for all of us and how you must upskill and be ready for what's coming, I am thrilled to have with us Professor William Kerr from Harvard Business School, all the way from Boston. He is the Darbeloff Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School, Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Development and Research, Co-Director of Harvard's Managing the Future of Work Initiative, and faculty chair of the Launching New Ventures program. He's been a recipient of many, many awards, has earned his PhD at MIT, a friendly school very close to Harvard Business School. And his most recent book is The Gift of Global Talent, How Migration Shapes Business, Economy, and Society, a book I have had the privilege to read through. And I strongly recommend reading this book to truly get a glimpse into what the future holds for global economies as migration takes force. And we're going to talk about many topics. Firstly, Professor Kerr, thank you so much for doing this. I know your time is extremely valuable. And thank you so much for sharing all the insights you have garnered over so many years of research and hard work. Welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Vibha, we always appreciate connecting to our alumni, and this is an important topic. Thank you for having me.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Much appreciated. So, Professor, I want to just sort of set the stage for this conversation. You know, as we thought about writing this book, people were like, why would you write a book about the future? Everyone says live in the now, live in the moment. So why the future? Why are you running this initiative at the school? Why think about the future of work? Why talk about it?
Well, I think we all appreciate that there is this enormous transformation of our workplace, of our world, in fact, that's underway. And I think we're going to break down various drivers of that transformation and possible remedies or actions that one can take as we go through this conversation. But the imperative for companies to change is enormous. It's immediate. It must happen. And likewise, the imperative for workers to change is immediate and must happen. And we'll try to maybe make the connection between those two. But we created this initiative recognizing that this change is going to be important for society and how businesses function. And the role that we can play in that process is by enabling the worker transformation to accompany the business transformation. You set up this idea of like, sit in the now or sit in the moment. And that can, of course, be very useful. I think sometimes we all obsess a little bit too much about what we don't have or what could be around the corner. But there's this, a saying that's attributed to Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player. It could be someone else that originally came up with it, but it was skate to where the puck is going. So you had the idea, like, how do you do so well? He goes, well, I'm not skating to where the puck is now. I'm skating to where the puck is going. And we like to think we are engaged in that. Now, no one knows exactly where the puck is going to be in the future or what the future is going to hold. But we like to think we try to work with organizations and particularly leaders and managers to help them understand how to keep better track of where the puck is likely to be able to skate themselves a little bit faster. So try to help people with the tools so that they can address this future in the best way possible.
Okay, great. Okay, so very difficult to predict the future, but you're trying to work with organizations, not just companies, but also workforces, so that you're enabling change in both from bottom up and top down and sort of finding a middle ground somewhere. Okay, now how do you think about the future? What are you seeing as primary factors as you've been researching this, as you talk to companies? What's hitting them? What are some of the factors that you see as the sort of predominant forces of the future of work?
Sure. There are two factors that we have focused most on in our work, and then I'll add a third towards the end that's been less central to us. The first factor, not surprising to anyone who's been really awake for the last decade or more, is the level of technological advancement that is underway, and in particular how it's moved from being historically about computation, about doing routine tasks over and over again, coming into some of those famous back office functions and really doing something significant to improve those, to being ever more about the predictive tasks, the non-routine, the cognitive tasks, and where they're going to be. And that has significant implications for what a business is going to try to do with its workforce and how businesses are going to compete with each other. And I can kind of take no step further than just recognizing the concept of open AI being available on everybody's desktop around the world, ChatGPT for $20 or whatever the local rate is astounding. And we've never had that level of technology infusion throughout our workplaces and education institutes and society. So trying to understand what technology is doing. That one, and you mentioned that some things are
going faster. The rate of change and the acceleration in technology advancement is much quicker. And you're saying it's now becoming accessible for a very, very low price. So it's a total.
Yeah. I mean, historically, you thought about maybe technology being embedded in a factory that you're going to build. That factory could have a 30-year useful life, and you're making sort of very lumpy decisions, and you have to worry about obsolescence and decommissioning and so forth. Today, technology is going to be, especially when it's done through software as a service and similar, it's going to be there. It's going to be instantaneous. It's going to be up to date. It's going to be rapidly moving on you. And it's going to be something that's available to large numbers of businesses and organizations and how they enter the workplace. So it's going to be a significant change in how technology influences what we do in the workplace. You mentioned that some things are unknowable about the future. I think technology is one that is clearly unknowable towards the future. If we were to dial this back and had this conversation 3 years ago, we would not have been predicting any of the large language models that are now what we've started the podcast or the conversation with. There is one thing that is quite predictable, although it varies across countries and regions, which is demographics. So in many parts of the North America, East Asia, all throughout Europe and so forth, organizations and countries are facing very significant demographic changes, aging populations that are going to be severely impacting their workplace. We had a panel that I just came from where someone who was embedded in the Japanese market noted that Japan is losing 500,000 people in population every year. And likewise, China is going to go through population decline as its demographic plays out. And the United States is a relatively young country compared to some of its peers, is also going to go through the baby boomers retiring and the demographic shifts that happen in the workplace. And as we can unpack a little bit later, it turns out technology and demographics are very tightly intertwined. Like there's a reason why you see these two things happening at the same time. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but those are the two that we have really centered in on trying to understand how they intersect and what are their implications for the workplace. Okay. The last one that I'll just quickly put up on there is climate change and sustainability and environment. I don't think our group at HBS has spent as much time on that particular topic, but it's clearly very important to the future. Others at the school certainly are.
Okay, great. So change in demographics, of course, technology, and then some, of course, climate change. Three big themes that you identified. Let's maybe go into each one a little bit. Let's talk about AI, right? AI is everywhere. AI is everything. Seems omnipresent, seems sort of inevitable. What are the implications? Sam Altman says there are going to be no jobs. Where do you stand on this argument of no jobs versus more productivity in the system, because now mundane jobs are done by a robot, and then I have more time to innovate, create, and then invent new things. So my productivity actually as a human being increases, and therefore innovation increases. So where do you stand on the spectrum of no jobs versus new jobs?
Vibha, it's a great point. And sometimes I like to have this kind of almost yin and yang part of my presentations or slides where I start with the technology side, and usually there's some fears or promise of a jobless future. So it's like it's either utopia or it's dystopia, but either way, there's not going to be jobs in the future. And then I swivel over and we look at the demographic side. And when I'm actually interacting with lots of leaders in the workplace right now, and their question is often, are there going to be any workers again in the future? So they look at very low and persistently low unemployment rates, labor force participation challenges, the struggles they have to field the workforce with the skills and similar that they would like to have, and feel this anxiety or tension around it. And the connection, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that in an era where you see lots of demographic changes, technology is one of the answers to those changes. So it's not surprising that countries like Japan and China and Germany have been at the leading edge of automation and robotics. There are also countries that are facing significantly older workforces. And one of the answers to that is to engage in heavy automation to try to boost the productivity of the workforce. Now, the technology ends up spreading to other countries and to other environments that don't have that same demographics. And that's often where I get to be more worried about potential job implications. As a whole, I'm always willing to be a little bit worried about the future of jobs. But at the same time, the history for a couple hundred years of dealing with technology has been that it's easier for us to identify the jobs that are going to go away. It's difficult for us to understand the jobs that are going to replace them. And there's reasons to believe that even if you have a lot of artificial intelligence embedded throughout the organizations, there's still going to be a lot of things that people are going to do that will be very complementary to that technology. And kind of like a crystal test or idea is that whatever gets to be very, very cheap, you want to have the skill that's next to it that it becomes in high demand. And so when we had like the rise of the skilled workforce and a lot of the returns to education over the last 50 years, well, computers made basic computation very cheap. And so we really valued the financial planners that could sit on top of that.
Sure.
As you move to a world where AI is going to be really, really good at a bunch of those kind of basic predictive tasks and kind of producing the tests there, the people that can manage that system, that can understand the data that you are feeding into the system, that can figure out how to get new data that's proprietary for their business and put that in there, that can translate the results on the other side or make actions, that's going to be very important skills for some time to come.
Okay, so you have to have sort of a leg up on technology. Sounds like you have to build a lot more sort of human skills, managerial skills, emotional skills, things that the machines can't replicate. But you are foreseeing a large chunks of jobs definitely getting annihilated. You're going to see a lot of jobs just going away.
I think, let me first recognize on the skill side, I think you're correct that at present, the technology is not as anywhere near as good at making the connections across people. That's something that there will be some learning curve, and we should expect the technology to go up the learning curve. And there are large markets where people would like to have solutions. Think about elderly care. If you could have the robot that is in the homes of elderly patients and could have a greater rapport or relationship with the individual, that's going to be a more attractive product and build for that. I'd likewise also just recognize that humans sometimes aren't very good at social skills. You know, we have a wide range, and for some people it's a strength, and for other people it's not a strength, and so we have to watch out for that. I want to go back to though your question about jobs going away, and the way we as economists tend to think about that is not about jobs but about tasks. And every job is a collection of tasks. So if you looked at what I do as a faculty member over the course of a week, there's a wide range of activities that range from very mundane to very mentally taxing, some that are in front of people, some that are obscure and private, kind of settings, some that really are very exposed to technology, and I better be ready, for technology to take those things, but other pieces that are more removed from that. And so what we anticipate for most people is that they are going to have significant parts of their current portfolio of tasks be automated, and they are going to have to, if they want to be viable in the workplace, if they want to continue to thrive, are going to have to move further into the things that are complementary to what the automation is doing.
Okay, great. Okay, so since you sort of laid it out for us very well, what are the implications of this then on income inequity? It sounds like most of the data is owned by sort of oligopoly, monopoly, whatever you want to call it, of firms. You know the data better than I do. There's all these trillionaires coming up on the list. Income inequity is just going. It's blatantly increasing. You're seeing it in Silicon Valley. You're seeing it all over. what happens in an AI induced world where you have fewer people now accessing data, accessing this sort of rampant technology and benefiting from it. And then you have maybe a large swath of the population that doesn't have this sort of access or is not able to monetize that sort of access. So are you foreseeing the income gaps further widen, or are you seeing some sort of equity settle in, because just with new technology comes high productivity and then everyone is just better off
Yeah.
because
I think that's one place where my crystal ball is a bit murky. There's cloudy on the horizon. I'll try to answer with a couple of different parts of the income distribution. I think there's some reason or concern to worry about a few very large entities or corporations that really own the space. There's a lot of returns for data and AI and these models and so forth. And yet, let me kind of give the counter argument around that, is that, again, let's go back to, okay, so ChatGPT is a big thing. It's actually almost universally available. It's the same kind of in the early parts of the cloud, we would have said that that's, or servers in general, that's very sort of tilted towards large organizations. But any of my MBA students with a credit card can now get access to Amazon Web Services and get something off the ground. So there is a countervailing commercial argument that leads oftentimes to these very advanced technologies actually being more broadly disseminated. I do think you'll continue to have some consternation and maybe even legitimate worry about very, very top incomes for a handful of maybe individuals. And I would love to think about, making sure that they pay fair shares of taxes and all the other stuff. But I think that's, I kind of limit the sort of the scope right now for what I see there. Across the broader part of the landscape. Again, let me go to a place where you're at pretty much full employment. So a country that you don't have excess labor, you got a lot of people a lot of companies are looking for workers. Technology at that point and entrepreneurship tends to have ways of trying to tilt the technology towards use cases that companies would find most valuable. And if you think about very, very advanced technologies, well, some of that will benefit the supercharged data scientist that sits inside Google and is doing the work. But when I have a technician that comes to my house to look at my air conditioner or to look at, the heat system, he brings a iPad that can be instantly updated for all forms of configurations and models, and they're able to get to work right away. And the studies that we've done so far, and I can go into more detail if helpful, have looked at everyone from call center workers up to consultants, and has found that the technology is currently benefiting most the least experienced on the job. So what it does is it kind of flattens the experience curve. That would suggest that it's not going to lead to some kind of rampant, kind of widening of the income distribution. In fact, perhaps it's going to be pressing on there. There's kind of a final segment which goes to this question about, well, sometimes these technologies flow across borders and they're being placed into environments where you actually had a very, very young workforce. You actually needed lots of jobs. And I think we do have reason to worry in some of those settings where you have just too much technology for where that workplace, where that population was or currently is. That's places where I think you could really start to worry about, is there some kind of, joblessness that's being created because you needed less advanced technologies at the moment.
Okay, which circles back to your initial point about demographic changes and technology advancements. Okay, yeah. What is the role then of universal basic income coming in? Do you really foresee this? The Scandinavian countries have this. Many countries have it in some capacity, right? There are tax stops given, there are some sort of handouts given, but are we really going to see a world that moves to sort of equitable universal basic income for all? And where will the money come from? Who's going to generate this wealth to be able to distribute this wealth? And how, to me, that is like serious dystopia, right? How do you have a world where you're running a capitalist economy and a socialist economy at the same time? How do two systems of government run within the same country? how does that even work? So how does this pan out?
Yeah, I'm currently skeptical about universal basic income, but I think we need to also run some experiments. Let me start with the skepticism, which I think is something that you sound like you've already identified a lot of the components. Uh, in my class, Managing Future of Work, we have this case study which looks at three possible programs: universal basic income, federal jobs guarantees, which often are also thought about, and then basically staying with our current system, which is in the United States is focused around targeted poverty alleviation. So in particular, kids and poor people are ones that are, the targets of most programs that come out. And with universal basic income, I think a lot of very smart people get surprised at the cost that we are talking about for the program, and the fact that a few of these Silicon Valley billionaires can't just pay for this out of their taxes. And so if you think about a basic $1,000 a month UBI program, if you did that for every American, every adult American, you would be looking at about $4 trillion of, annual cost.
Yeah.
And to put that number in comparison, that's more than the total taxable income, not taxes paid, taxable income of the top 5% of the US population. So
Wow.
it's not even just like that very Silicon Valley billionaires. It's like the top 5%, and you still are not even close to like covering it. So you'd have to go into the broader distribution. So I don't think we've really worked out like how that payment system would go. And there's also another, kind of set of other features that have to be worked through. A number of the instances where people put UBI in, they find, for example, increases in rental rates or other forms of inflation. So if you have that landlords know that everyone's now getting $1,000 check, they're going to just say, "Hey, I'm going to charge some more rent in these places." So we have to work out some of those kinks. I go back though that even though I'm a bit skeptical given the cost, and that I personally prefer programs that are going after current needs, either the children or the poor that are in society. If we get into one of those scenarios that you described at the beginning a little bit, anything that we've learned about how one of these programs would work would be very valuable in that setting. And so I'm all for, let's run some experiments, let's learn about these pieces, but I don't see it as immediately important. And it goes especially to, again, a situation where you have an unemployment rate that hovers around 4% in the United States. There's work available for people, and there's other ways for them to be economically sufficient.
Okay, so you don't see this happening anytime in the near future. You don't see this sort of as an inevitable reality that we're going to have to confront.
I'm skeptical. Maybe I'm over-indexing on the panel that I just left from, but on that panel there was an individual that was very knowledgeable about technology and was suggesting that we are actually only 5 or 6 years out from robots that will have every functionality, intelligence, emotional connection, to your earlier point, that humans have, and it'll all be in humanoid robots. And this wasn't someone that was just a crazy sci-fi writer. This is someone who has local knowledge, works with this stuff on a daily basis. So I think in that sense, again, we often say with technology that things are overhyped. They're much, much later to actually come than what they're predicted. And then when they suddenly come, they come in force and in a way that we had not anticipated that strength. And I think we feel some of that with AI right now. And it's hard to really project from here to the next thing. If I can, I'll give an example from autonomous vehicles, which again was always a healthy sort of litmus test for me for how people thought about the question. So if we thought about technology, autonomous vehicles represent non-routine cognitive intelligence that's in the real world. We've had a lot of non-routine stuff that happens outside of the physical world, like fraud detection at bank or personalized marketing, but places where your life or my life wasn't at risk, if you deployed the technology at scale. And autonomous vehicles, that's very much alive and in our everyday surroundings and environment, and their accidents will happen. So we had this way that we talked about in class, which it was about 5 years ago that Goldman Sachs made this prediction. But Goldman Sachs had kind of like an adoption curve of autonomous vehicles. And the midpoint of that adoption curve, so when 50% penetration had happened, was going to be in 2043. So at that point, it was about 25 years into the future. And we would start class with a debate about whether that point was going to come sooner or later, and dial it back to 6, 7 years ago. And I think most people in the class were saying that the midpoint was going to be about 2025. So right about now. It was when they were saying half the cars in circulation were going to be autonomous vehicles.
Wow. Okay.
Well, over time, they indexed, and next thing you know, it was like, oh no, 2045 is too optimistic. And now probably people are kind of back into the 2045 era. But here's the ultimate point that I want to make beyond just it's hard to predict, which is something that is that pervasive, that's going to impact everything around us, from all those parking lots to how insurance markets operate to the way that we as residents live in surrounding areas. If it's going to affect everything, it actually is kind of hard to change it, because we already have this installed base of all these cars and roads and parking lots and insurance markets that are very slow to make the changes. So it can be pretty quick for us to adopt ChatGPT into parts of our life that are, maybe making the term paper that is due for class or the marketing report or so forth. But to go to all these steps where we really talk about full automation of significant chunks of our economy, much, much more challenging.
Okay, because there is some sort of latency, there's some sort of inertia, and there's some sort of regulated systems that are going to be
And
difficult.
people have there's jobs, that are at stake. I don't think people tend to appreciate how much whatever politics allows is what technology is also going to allow.
Great.
And one of the things we talked about with autonomous vehicles that is, I'm not going to get the exact number right, but it's something on the order of 35 to 40 of the United States, so 35 of our 50 states. The number one occupation of a male is a truck driver.
Sure.
Yeah, it's actually the largest occupation of a male, period. But in 35 states, it's the largest.
Wow.
And so you imagine that if the truck drivers think they are all getting thrown out of their jobs,
Sure.
well, guess what the state legislatures are going to do? And they're going to make it very difficult. And on the other hand, if the truckers union says, hey, this is a great technology, well, then the politics will be behind you. And so we're going to have to take a lot of these steps kind of together.
Okay, great. Because obviously it's very deeply entrenched in the economy, and there's too many layers. Since you talked about policy making, I do want to touch upon what's happening with the laws in terms of AI, right? Because we spoke about how few companies own the data. Largely, these companies are based out of the US, but a lot of the SaaS products will leverage some of that data, some of that technology, and then sort of seep through borders and be used by China, India, Japan, Europe, etc., right? But the technology rests in the United States. So who's going to make these laws governing AI? Are you going to see sort of country laws? Are you going to see like a global organization emerge that says, oh, these are global AI regulation? Is it going to be state subject? Is it going to be a city? Like, how is this going to play out? Because you're talking about data, right? So it's a fluid sort of asset. So how does that work?
I would be skeptical that there's going to be a global regulatory framework. I think there's enough fracturing of our global order at the moment and enough tensions that the likelihood of everyone getting on board for a set of regulations is got to be extremely low. There's also, of course, links to national military apparatus, and AI is a big part of that. And so I don't see that global order coming. There will be a healthy or challenging kind of geopolitical regional questions. So where will Europe kind of set its AI policy and laws? It clearly would like to have a good seat at the table, even though it doesn't, have many of if any of the very big companies that are in the space, whereas the China and the United States and so forth are more easily kind of going to try to focus on their spheres of influence and domain. But even within the United States, I suspect that there's going to be layers of regulation and questions that are being asked or being put in front of business leaders to work with. You'll have very progressive cities and locations are going to have a set of policies that they're going to want to pass, just like we have different policies at state levels around emissions, of automobiles. So I think you're going to see like differing levels at the state, regional, city levels, as well as also national levels. And it'll take some time to sort out. We'll probably have some rather high profile court cases in countries like the US that will kind of rule perhaps on the constitutionality of some laws versus other laws as we work through this process. It's going to be messy. It's going to be something that it will be sticky. This is part of the reason why I think it's very top of mind for business leaders, is that they need a license to operate. They need the ability to put the technology to work in their workplace. And that requires ever more attention be placed on how they are interacting with local governments, national governments around the world. If you are running a multinational enterprise and some of your AI that you're putting, let's say you're a US company, you have a large workforce that's in Egypt, you may have some questions about the implications for the Egyptian workforce of technologies that you're putting into place in the United States. So you're going to have these very, a lot of global leaders are going to be called to task as to what are the impacts for jobs in my jurisdiction from the technologies that you're putting in globally.
Sure, yeah, of course. I mean, it circles all the time. It circles back to where you started, right? Like, because the demographics are so different, income levels are so different. Therefore, political considerations and economic considerations are different. Since we are on this, the strike that happened in Hollywood, there was a big strike with the writers, and and they said you find AIs coming in, but like the models are being trained on pre-existing data, pre-existing scripts, pre-existing literature, pre-existing books. Who owns that data, right? Like how are you where's the attribution to what the learning models are being trained on? So is there a thought on this? Is there a comment you'd like to make on? Because I mean, we're all using these models, but like there is no real attribution to the original source or where all this learning and knowledge came from. So where are you on this conversation?
I think I'm with you in that it's a very thorny situation. There will be sort of the typical questions about what was fair use of prior, literature and art and findings and so forth, versus what was the, what was taken too far in terms of training models on stuff that was not done from there. Interestingly, there are a couple of faculty members at HBS that are working on models right now that would be able to backtrack from Vibha's use of a large language model into what were the inputs that were most influential for her use on the other side. So it's not going to be a pure black box as the technology goes forward in terms of we'll never know where your particular inputs came from. They're going to actually be able to trace some of that, backtrack some of that. And so that may help create greater markets around this. But this is, again, broadly speaking, a big, brave new world for all the legal jurisdictional questions of, whose data is all of my activity, all of my activities. Do I own the data? Does somebody else own the data? Do they have the right to monetize my mobility patterns, and sell that off to somebody else? Big questions that we're going to keep working through, and I'm sure more are going to be on the horizon.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move out of AI and talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. You run the department. You're a professor of entrepreneurship. Where are you seeing new businesses coming? Are you seeing certain sort of trends in sectors people are identifying? Are you seeing AI everywhere, everything? Are you seeing every business model coming up, every sort of proposal saying, oh, professor, AI in food, AI in consumer electronics, AI, is it?
I think it's hard to find a presentation today that doesn't at least mention AI. And that's if you're writing a business plan at the moment, it's smart to tack it on in some manner, just like in earlier eras, saying you had an NFT or a crypto, or go back earlier to the .com era. it was something that was trendy at the moment. Um, I think, let me begin with, I think there has never been a better time to be engaged in entrepreneurship, and especially growth-oriented entrepreneurship, than right now. Maybe that's an overstatement. Maybe somebody could dial me back to, a certain point in 1982 where it was better. But in terms of the ability of entrepreneurs to build important businesses and retain for themselves significant equity capital in doing so, this is a special moment. And that's why I think we see so many more of our MBA students engaged in the entrepreneurial learning process and discovery. So you mentioned at the beginning that I came to the school around 2005. And at that point in time, which was not so long ago. I don't feel like I'm that old, but and you were not terribly long after that being an MBA student yourself. But if you went back to that point in time, to get a basic internet company off the ground, you might have been talking several $million that you needed to raise early on to get your servers and to get the computing infrastructure set up and all the things that follow from that. Today, everything can be done in a virtual basis. AWS, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, can provide support you. You can go to Shopify to get your storefront and the delivery services. So you can get like all this infrastructure that sits behind your business at a very fractional rate. And what that lets people do is experiment. They can say, I don't need to raise millions of dollars and take on dilutive equity to do that. I can try to support myself for the next 6 months, put $25,000 or something like that towards running the experiments. And if this works, then I've got a very significant kind of opportunity ahead. And I am a believer, even though I don't know that it will, I'm skeptical that it will go into a jobless dystopian future. I am a big believer that we are at the very early innings of what will be a significant rebuilding of the economy, just like the basic digital era, not just internet, but digital, has already been rebuilding the economy for the last 20 years. That's going to be happening around these technologies, and they're going to be in professional services as well as also in product companies and elsewhere.
Okay, great. Okay. So it seems like digitization, technology, all pervasive. It seems like every idea that comes to you is broadly around that sector. You seem very optimistic about entrepreneurship. How are you now training entrepreneurs to think about a world where there's a gig economy, where hours don't matter, where borders don't matter? You could be hiring people sitting anywhere in the world. I could be a freelancer working with 8 different companies at the same time. So very, very different from the sort of construct of the American enterprise, right? You think of the General Electrics of the world and conventional. It's Harvard Business School, right? This is what all the cases we read when I was at school were like large enterprises sitting and functioning in big headquarters, and the world as we knew it then is completely changed. It's going to change even more rapidly. What happens to the role of the entrepreneur, and how does management then change in this sort of new work order? How are you training these students to think about a new work order?
That's a great question. I would begin with, I remain maybe a little bit old school. I'm willing to be updated, but I remain a little bit old school. If you told me you had a founding team that's crammed together in a conference room over in the corner versus a founding team that is fully virtually distributed, I'd probably bet, all things being equal, on the one that's crammed into the corner. So that, yes, there's avenues for virtual work, there's remote, there's going to be companies that are going to architect themselves, ultimately to being virtual. But at the same time, that, especially in the earliest of phases, to get the company well-grounded and off to the right start, I think that high-frequency collaboration that comes in person can still be exceptionally valuable. So I would anticipate seeing that. The gig economy is an interesting input. It certainly will affect how some people are staffing up their businesses, whether they are bringing people in a fractional way to fill a specific role, or whether they also themselves feel more comfortable to be able to engage in a startup company while they're earning some money as a gig worker on the side, and kind of maybe do those two things in parallel, and then finally something that pops up out and they go and jump on it. So that kind of extra layer is one that I think you'll see a lot more willingness to experiment. And what we have typically called like a hybrid entrepreneurship. So you're not going all in from the very beginning just on the one thing. You have enough to support your family or your living expenses, and then you're working on the idea on the side. And then once it catches fire, you're ready to go with it.
Okay, all right. So you're saying you're still a little old school. Now you're still saying the company that sort of huddled together, but in the same physical space, you'd bet on that over versus the one that has this genius from Japan, this manja artist from Japan, and this techie from, I don't know, India.
Yeah.
And
Well, again, Viva, maybe 10 years from now, when somebody's looking at this, they're going to laugh at me. But I will, the very first elective curriculum class that I had was a class called Launching Global Ventures. And it was, I worked on it from about 2010 to about 2013. And it was all of these companies that from the very beginning, they got set up with a multi-country footprint. Maybe manufacturing was in China, R&D was in India, and design was in Paris or something like that. But all of them had some form of multi-country footprint from the start. And it was always easy to point to the business model advantage that was supposed to deliver. It was also very easy to understand how difficult it was to actually get those businesses to work and to function. And I think that's going to stick with us. You mentioned earlier borderless world. I don't think we're headed towards a borderless world. In fact, I think borders are starting to come back up. There's a lot more kind of grit or a lot more kind of enforcement being put on made in India or made in America or made in wherever kind of policies around that. So I'm fully in belief that we all need to think about the role of virtual work, and the cost advantages are certainly something that every chief financial officer, CFO would like to see. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there's going to be some probably boundary, at least for the near term, around that.
Okay, great. Okay, that actually was segueing into my next question, and I'll go a little bit on that since your book talks about it also. Your book, The Gift of Global Talent, talks about this influx of this sort of educated elite of most global countries. India, China, and South Korea, the three largest international countries, forming this educational elite in most American universities. And then the rise of protectionism and sort of how that's going to play out with H-1B visas, etc. With half the world's population, I think 4 billion people are going to go to the polls this year. What are you seeing as trends in geopolitics? I think I know you alluded to it right now. You're seeing a world with more borders. Is that right? And how are you seeing that in the larger, the most fundamental economies in the world?
I've got a shorter term and a longer term perspective on this. In the longer run, I think that there's going to be global competition for talent. I think the number of countries that are going to face shortages in their workplace and of the population that will have the skills that the businesses want to put to work is going to lead to ever greater competition for top talent around the world. Likewise, there's going to be a number of countries that will even take a more expansive net, towards talent as they think about their fiscal imbalances, the sheer debt overhangs, and that they need people paying taxes and building from that. In the shorter run, it's kind of hard for me to make a prediction exactly when those dynamics will become the greater of the forces. You have a lot of citizens in a number of countries that feel like the last 15, 20 years, this was your inequality comments a little bit earlier, have somehow helped the world but haven't helped them. And you can get into debates about whether or not the median income is higher or lower when you adjust for various things. Most of the data suggests that it tends to be higher, but on the other side, that doesn't change the way they feel. And kind of the sort of the disempowerment or disenfranchisement that they are experiencing. And this is certainly true in the US. It's certainly true in the UK. It's a big part of the Brexit decisions. It's true in a number of European countries. So it's kind of a global phenomenon right now. And if you're a politician and you're seeking to tap into that resentment, speaking badly about immigration is a go-to kind of line or playbook. So I don't know in the short run how this is going to play out across different countries, but in the longer horizon, I think the pressures to be able to adapt towards the future is going to drive countries to be competing more, at least for the students that you mentioned, or for the workforce that they are desiring.
Okay, great. So this could also have implications in terms of technology share, knowledge sharing, data sharing, right? Because if they say, let's put up our fences, and we're not going to share our tech, we're not going to share our data, and we're going to sort of keep everything within our borders and boundaries, then everything changes again. Then you have, a new superpower sort of dynamic play out again. And you see, then it's like a new world order, because there's a flattening, which Thomas Friedman talked about, with information flowing freely, human beings flowing freely. But if you go back now, this is sort of like a reversal. It's sort of the entire conversation we had sort of flips back, and you say, hey, well, there's no AI everywhere in the world because these products now are not accessible. And then everything, this whole new world order we're talking about, might not even exist if they sort of put up their fences. So who knows? Okay, is there a comment you want to make on that?
I just very briefly recognize I'm not sure the world was ever so flat. I think it was more spiky. And most of the last 15 years has been a world where, whether it's Seoul, whether it's Delhi, whether it's London, whether it's Boston, you had these places that were the centers of a lot of activity. And the drop off, though, into areas that are only an hour away by car ends up being quite significant. And it's difficult for me to fully envision what unwinding that interconnectedness of the global cities would mean. And likewise, you have recognizing the tensions, especially between the US and China. You have a lot of companies that are these multinational, their revenues are the equivalent of some countries' GDPs. Like how the role that they're going to play in this is significant. And if you were to shut down a foreign company from being in your area, but you had 30,000 workers that were in that country that worked for, like, I really don't know how that would play out. So it's easier for me to imagine one or two kind of basic cleavings like we've described. Okay. But for most of the rest, I think you're going to see more interconnectedness than just the siloed countries.
Okay, all right. You're sitting on one of my favorite campuses in the world. You're at Harvard Business School. It's the mecca of education, at least for me. It's the school that gave me a lot. It's taught me a lot. I'm a firm believer in the business school, in the model, in the learning that happens within sort of closed doors. But there is now a common parlance about colleges going out of fashion. Schools won't exist, colleges won't exist, AI is going to come over, it's going to be personalized learning. You might see sort of, human beings now become sort of knowledge centers and not education institutions. So there's all this talk about, education's completely getting disrupted, and schools and colleges, as we've known them for all these years, getting disrupted and getting sort of moving way down the value chain. Do you see any promise in this belief? Do you really think people are going to stop going to school and college, and this whole degree education is going to turn around?
I think if you look towards the future, skills are going to be in ever greater demand. Like we are all leaving a model that was for the last 100 years, where you could train somebody up by the time they were 18 or 22 with the skills that they were going to need for the next 35 years, more or less, and just worry about the next generation. And that was a different model, different time, different era, different companies, different universities, and so forth. So we need to have a significant revolution in terms of the education environment. I think there's going to be a lot more distance-based learning to the future. And I look at some organizations like Western Governors University, which is now has 100,000 plus students like on their campus that they are working to give 2-year kind of college degrees in cybersecurity or the like. Those are wonderful businesses, business models for education sector to advance. And likewise, you have to recognize that you're going to have significant needs to update individuals in the future in terms of their skill profiles. Whatever our graduates have today is going to be out of date in a decade, at least on things like some of the digital skills. You know, some of the leadership skills are more timeless. Some of the digital skills tend to have a relatively short half-life. Mm-hmm. And so the opportunity for us as the education sector is to make sure that we are equipping our students that are entering the system with the basics and the connection to us to continue to constantly provide them skills throughout their career ahead. And just like you get into this, if you're building hardware for a software-based product, you tend to overbuild the hardware because you know that there's going to be future updates on the software that need to happen. That may require us to think a little differently than the way we did when we were back closer to just a pure hardware company, where the graduate, when they leave, you want to keep in touch with them, but you're kind of planning that they're not going to come back. So we have to work on our model to make that work. But I'm also highly optimistic that as long as our model is blended, and it's personalized, and blended meaning that it's combining both physical and digital, time away from campus as well as time on campus. And as long as it gets almost like that Netflix personalization, that when Vibha comes to HBS's website, we know what her skill set was. We can remember the things that she's done in exec ed over the time since then. We might be able to scan out there and see like some of the stuff that you placed on YouTube and understand some of the things, skills you know about or interests you have there. And we can come back to you with a more personalized education journey for the next step. I think it's going to be a very compelling value proposition.
Wow. Okay, but that's pretty radical. That's very non-HBS, right? Because I sort of feel like business schools, and I'll speak from my experience in HBS, it was fairly templatized, right? You come into HBS, you go through a core curriculum. In fact, it was said that everyone, no matter what background you come from, so it was anti-personalization, right? Saying, hey, everyone should go through the same thing. So you're really seeing it completely sort of flip over, and you say, hey, now let's personalize the classroom. And how do you do that, in a classroom setting of
well, let me kind of try to thread the needle back through there, because lest my dean be listening, I'm certainly not proposing we get rid of our whole first year curriculum. I think the first year was the example of overbuilding the hardware. And you mentioned earlier this idea of you taking some classes that was you being placed in the role of the CEO running a 14,000 person company that was, way far away from where you were at that moment. That was a bit of an overbuilding. Like that's kind of creating the landscape. I think we very much value for the general management side of what we do, that the whole first year is something that's a shared experience by everybody. It's gotten updated. Like there's now at least one class that's a part of the first year where students are coding in R, as well as also the more traditional stuff like business, government, international economy, or foreign exchange rate. So it has the more modern kind of skill set and data science now a part of that. But it's still going to be something that we want to make sure that we create the right foundation that then you can kind of plug in different modules as they come later. If you were to kind of then go to the next level, we have our MBA, but we also have the enormous exec ed portfolio that we run. That's almost 100% customized. Like there are some long programs, but a lot of our attendees are coming for 3 days on negotiations, or they're coming for 5 days on digital marketing. And so we can kind of build those programs and opportunities that would be connected for them.
Okay, great. Okay, I know your time is precious. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we can close this. Just general advice you would give to someone who is, in high school, towards the end of high school, or in college right now, sort of stepping out into this big bad world. what would you tell them in terms of skilling, in terms of just thinking about the future, in terms of maybe even a degree education if someone's in high school? Like, what should they be thinking about in terms of being future ready, from a skilling and learning perspective?
I think I'd start with an appreciation that all of us are going to have to be in a continual renewal process for our skill sets.
Mm.
And it matters less to me which particular course or program of study that you're engaged in at this moment compared to building that aptitude and the attitude towards the skills journey that's in the future. And some of your skilling may come in a formal classroom. A lot of it's going to come through peers. Some of it's going to come through watching YouTube videos or whatever the local or TikTok, whatever the vendor is for you. And others of it could come through just trial and error, like being entrepreneurial, trying something out. The business may not work, but you may walk with a lot of skill sets. The world that I kind of sense towards the future is going to be one that's going to demand a lot more from individuals in terms of their skills that they bring to the workplace. So I think we're moving away from an environment that said, Vibha is going to be part of our business for 30 years. We're going to jointly invest in her on-the-job training as we go. We're going to understand where Vibha is weak, and we may just try to keep her out of those kind of situations. We're going to understand where she's strong, and we're going to try to dial her into some of those roles. And increasingly, it's going to move more towards something that may be a little bit more like a sports team, where we're going to have a lot of loyalty in the sense of like whatever your favorite cricket player is, they have a lot of loyalty between the team and the individual at a moment in time. But it's episodic, and it's not for forever. It's for a period, and there's a deep investment. And I've given this story several times because I think it's just an interesting remark of the way that this environment operates. So I was playing high school football many, many years ago in Alabama. And at the end of every practice, you had to run these wind sprints. So you have to run back and forth and back and forth. And it was awful. Like, it's the 99 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 or whatever that might be in Celsius. Like you were just suffering in the heat from there. And one of our coaches had played in the NFL, the National Football League. So he'd be a professional football player. And I remember at one practice, like saying, man, coach, how many sprints did you have to run when you were in the NFL? Thinking it was going to be we had to run 30 sprints. You only have to run 10 or something, one of those kind of stories. And he said, 0. I was kind of like, what? He said, my job was being a football player. You better believe that I was running sprints all the time on my own. I never actually had to be asked by my team to do those. I was expected every day, and if I didn't do it, I wasn't going to have a job. I think we're going to be in environments more where it's not that there's going to be antagonism or something that's like a vicious workplace. I think workplaces will be judged by how much they let an individual thrive, how much they create for them environments that maximize their career kind of lifetime values that lie ahead. But there's also going to be a lot of expectation for the individual to lean into the efforts themselves and to be ready to make those investments for the journey.
Okay, terrific. Okay, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for sharing your time. I'm glad we made this conversation happen without you cold calling me. So this is fabulous.
You kept a pretty tight leash on the conversation.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing your insights. I love that you were able to bring in so many different countries, so many different perspectives. You touched upon the economy, politics, law, tech. I mean, you really gave me a really broad-based sense of what the future holds for us. A very pragmatic and very sort of rooted in ground realities. So thank you for this refreshing take back to school, throw back to school, and beautiful. I love the fact that I could see the campus through the entire conversation.
Great.
Thank you, Professor William Kerr. It was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Thank you so much.